Hey, welcome to Battle Ready Saints. I'm Dave, and today we're going to be talking about logical fallacies. So, what's the difference between a good argument and a bad argument? How do we identify good reasons to believe something and call out bad reasoning when we see it, hopefully in our opponent's position? So, as Christians, we are dedicated to not just believing the truth, but being able to confidently and clearly articulate why we believe what we believe. This is not only important as we're sharing the gospel, but it also is very important when we're building up our brothers and sisters and bolstering our own faith when it comes to our own personal confidence in why we believe what we believe. Unfortunately, many people are much more comfortable in echo chambers, just surrounding themselves with people that already agree with them. So none of their positions are being pressure tested to see if they're actually battle ready, because they never take them out into battle. They're just, since everyone already agrees with the conclusion that they're making, they're just going to kind of let bad argumentation, bad reasoning, they're going to let it slide because, well, we all already agree on the important thing, and that's the conclusion. But this is a terrible way to develop a worldview, and you're never gonna have confidence in what you believe, because as soon as you take it outside of that echo chamber, it's gonna get attacked and it's gonna fall apart. So, understanding basic tenets of logic, understanding how to identify logical fallacies in not just other people's positions, but in your own, so that you could root them out and make your position more battle ready, is super important. So, we're gonna be getting into a little bit of that. This is not to make anybody a collegiate debater or anything like that. I'm not a collegiate debater. This is just for the average person, the average Christian who wants to be faithful in accurately and confidently presenting why they believe what they believe. So, one of the things that makes an argument bad is that it contains logical fallacies or logical errors. These are things that just indicate or show that a person's arguments are based on flawed logic. And so if you can identify these, then you have powerful reasons to reject whatever it is that proposition is, because it's been built on faulty logic, and we don't want that. So today we're just looking at 5 logical fallacies. There's a whole bunch more, but these are just 5 that I've found to be very common when I'm talking with people, or if you start reading arguments on social media, which we're all guilty of, you see these pop up all the time. And so these are in no particular order. And what's important is that you remember you grasp the concepts behind each of these, not so much that you remember the name so you could say, that's an ad hominem, because, that's not as important in a just a lay person's conversation, just the kind of debates or argumentation that you and I are going to be getting into. We don't need to call each of these out by name as they show up, but it's important that you can identify them and call out what they're doing to show you're using faulty logic here. That's a bad argument. So, without further ado, we'll get into the first one. All right, so the first one that we're going to go over is the ad hominem fallacy. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give a very brief description of what these are, and then we're going to go over some examples, and then end with why, like the lesson for this one, like what it is that we need to look out for with that particular fallacy. So again, we're not getting super in depth. We're just kind of giving big picture. So ad hominem means at the person. So what the person is saying who's committing the fallacy is directed at their opponent and not at their opponent's argument. So not the position that their opponent's taking. So this one is notorious for plaguing comment section debates online, right? You have a bunch of very opinionated and very untrained people arguing in comment sections, and usually it degenerates into just ad hominem attacks. You're a Nazi. Well, you're racist. Well, you're stupid if you believe that. Well, that, it just falls apart, and no one's actually arguing over positions. They're not presenting argumentation for their positions. They're just name calling. And that's really what ad hominem boils down to, is name calling. So some common examples that we might face as Christians would be, perhaps you take a literal view of Genesis and you want to present reasons for why you think that, or why you believe that maybe the earth isn't billions and billions of years old. And the response is, well, if you believe that, well, you're stupid, or well, you just don't believe science if you believe that. Well, notice that you're stupid, you don't believe science, those are directed at the person, not at the person's position. So the position would be the earth is, 10,000 years old or whatever it is. Same as if they were taking the position that it was billions of years old, and people that believed that the earth was younger said, well, you just don't believe the Bible if you believe that. Like, let's address the actual position that the person's taking and argue for or against the age of the earth, not just name call the person. So you can see this is pretty common for Christians to face in general with people and their general attitude towards religion. Religion's for stupid people, religion's for weak people that need a crutch to get through life. These are all arguments that attack the actual individuals and not the positions that they hold. So the lesson with ad hominem is we want to make sure that what we're saying is directed at the person's position that we're, debating or arguing with, and not the person themselves. And if someone's doing it to us, we want to make sure that we call it out. Again, it doesn't have to be by name. If you were in just a regular conversation and you use the term ad hominem, that would be kind of awkward. It's not necessary in, lay person conversation, but you can point out, hey, what you're saying is really more directed at me as a person and not so much at the position that I'm taking. So do you have actual reasons for why you disagree with my position, or are you just going to insult me? So that would be what we want to look out for with the first fallacy, ad hominem. So the next one that we're going to go over is called the false binary fallacy, or the false dilemma. And that's when somebody presents two mutually exclusive options as if they're the only things that you have to choose from, when really there's more options. So a couple examples. One would be if somebody makes the claim that, the Gospels are not reliable as historical documents because the authors were biased. So what they're saying is the binary choice that you have is either the gospel accounts are unbiased and reliable, or they're biased and unreliable. And those aren't your only two options. The authors of the gospels could have been biased in that they believed that what Jesus claimed was true, and they wrote, historically accurate and reliable biographies on the life of Jesus. Their bias in regards to whether or not they believed what Jesus was saying has nothing to do with undermining the historical reliability of the gospel accounts. So, don't get sucked into trying to argue for unbiasedness on behalf of the writers, because we don't hold this standard for other historical documents or other writings. Of course, people write about things that they're passionate about, things that they believe, and that does nothing to undermine the reliability of them. We test that reliability through other means. So that's one example. Another kind of current event that might be a bit of a hot topic would be the false binary that you either get the vaccine or you're an unloving person. I've heard that a bunch of times in Christian circles, and I think that's a terrible. It's a good example of a false binary, but it's a terrible thing to do to people, is to make them choose between these two things that are not mutually exclusive. There are lots of reasons why somebody might get the vaccine, and it doesn't make them, and it's not actually because they're unloving. So, for example, you could fully believe that the vaccine isn't helpful in keeping the people around you safe. And whether or not you're correct, that's based in that belief, not in not loving the people around you. It could be that you have legitimate medical issues that prevent you from getting the vaccine. Maybe you're allergic to things that are in the vaccine, so you can't get it. That just because you can't get it for that reason, it doesn't mean that you're unloving to those around you. Maybe you have natural immunity, and so you don't believe that getting the vaccine would add any protection to the people around you or to yourself. These are all reasons that you wouldn't get the vaccine that don't make you unloving. But given this false binary, you would have to you'd have to be in that category of unloving because you didn't get the vaccine. Well, there are other reasons why you might not get the vaccine other than you're just not being loving. So we want to be careful in kind of pigeonholing people into these two options, and there are no exceptions. Like, there are exceptions. So I know it's a controversial topic, but chew on it for a while, and I think that you'll see that there is a logical fallacy going on in that there are more options than just either get the vaccine or you are unloving. Fallacy number 3, the straw man fallacy. So this is a fallacy that has no brain. I'm just kidding. That is the logical error where the person takes a distorted or caricaturized view of their opponent's argument and argues against that instead of their actual argument. So a caricature, we've seen these in like comic strips and stuff, and it's they'll do it to politicians and everything, where they give this distorted image of what they are. They exaggerate certain features and make them look ridiculous, and it bears enough resemblance so that we know who it is that they're basically mocking, but it doesn't actually accurately represent what they look like. So when somebody does that with a position, they distort it and make it look very easy to defeat, so that they have an easier time arguing against it, instead of the opposite of a straw man, which would be a steel man argument, which is where you make your opponent's view as strong as you can, so that when you defeat it, there's not a stronger way that they could present it that you still haven't dealt with yet. So we always want to steel man the position that we're refuting, and not straw man them. So some examples of straw man fallacies would be, I'm actually going to start with one that I see a lot in the church. And again, I will remind you that I'm using these examples to not argue for or against the position, but just demonstrate fallacies in an approach to arguing for or against a position. So the thing that I see being strawmanned a lot, is that a verb? Strawmanned? Can you strawman something? I think you can. The thing that I see Christians using strawman arguments for a lot is evolution. And again, whether you believe in evolution or don't believe in evolution, you want to have good reasons for why you do or don't. And you'll hear the most ridiculous arguments against evolution, like, well, if you think we all evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys around? Debunked. And it's not like that. That's not an accurate representation of what the theory of evolution says. And so again, because a lot of times we're in echo chambers, people are like, well, I agree with the conclusion. High five, evolution's debunked. And really it's not, because if you were to try to take that argument out into the real world, and somebody who knew, had a half decent idea of what the theory of evolution is, they would be able to refute that argument very easily, because it doesn't accurately represent the theory of evolution. It's a straw man argument. Christians have a lot of experience being the object of this fallacy, when people will say things like, well, you Christians believe that there's some big guy up in the clouds that's scrutinizing every little thing that you do. Well, that's an exaggerated distortion of what it is that Christians believe. It's not an accurate portrayal of what evangelical Christians believe about the God of the universe. So it's an easier thing to refute, because they make it sound ridiculous, but it's a straw man fallacy. So the lesson of the straw man fallacy is to accurately understand the position that we're attempting to refute before we refute it. So that way we don't accidentally refute something that's a caricature of the position that we're trying to refute, that's easily batted down under scrutiny. But we also want to make sure that people aren't doing that to us. And so we can call out, well, that's a misrepresentation of what it is that I believe. And so I think you need a better understanding of the actual position that you say you disagree with. So straw man fallacy. All right, so fallacy number 4 is the red herring fallacy. This is another one that is extremely common, and probably most of us have at least some experience with being on the receiving end, and maybe even on the giving end. So a red herring fallacy is when somebody distracts from the main argument by bringing up something that may only be loosely connected on like a surface level, but not actually part of the original discussion. So to understand this concept best, I think knowing why it's called red herring is very helpful. So a red herring is a fish. And back in the day, I don't know if they do this anymore, but when they would train hunting dogs to track foxes, one of the things that they would do to sort of test the dog would be to drag these stinky fish called red herrings across the trail of the fox that the dog was supposed to be tracking. So if the dog ignored the distracting scent and continued after the fox, that was a good thing. And if it got distracted with the stinky fish and went off and followed after that, that's a bad thing. So in this sense, the stinky red herring would be the distraction, when somebody tries to divert attention away from the topic at hand. And they may not be doing this on purpose. A lot of times people will do this when they start getting uncomfortable with the point that's being made, and so they want to kind of move the topic onto something else. So for example, maybe you have an atheist friend that you're discussing the existence of God with, and you're presenting your arguments for why you believe that God exists, and maybe they're having a hard time answering those arguments, and so they swivel and say, well, you people believe that homosexuality is a sin, and I don't think I could believe something that's that unloving. Well, that would be a good example of a red herring, because nothing that you've said so far, presumably, rests on the morality of homosexuality. And so that's just a more complex topic that the atheist could disagree with you over, because they don't even assent to the existence of a God in the first place, so they wouldn't believe in the authority of Scripture, and they wouldn't believe in moral standards being objective and all of that. And so that's a much easier conversation for them to kind of maneuver in, and it gets them away from that whether or not God exists conversation that they weren't very comfortable with. So we would want to be aware of what's going on and see that okay, so that's a red herring, and we would redirect the conversation back to the argument at hand, which is the merits for the arguments that you've put forth for the existence of God, which don't have anything to do with the morality of homosexuality. That's something that you could get to at a different time, but stay focused on the fox. Another good example of a red herring is in a debate between apologist William Lane Craig and he's debating a Muslim apologist, Yusuf something rather, I can't remember his name. But what they're debating over, the topic of the debate is the deity of Jesus. And the Muslim apologist keeps trying to sidetrack William Lane Craig into arguing over the inerrancy of Scripture. So while that is an important doctrine, it wasn't related to the arguments that William Lane Craig was making for the deity of Jesus. And so he actually, if I remember correctly, he actually calls out that red herring by name and says, well, this is a red herring. You're trying to get me sidetracked into this sidebar discussion of another topic that's only very, like, on a surface level may appear to be connected to the argument that I'm making, but none of my argumentation actually rests on that. So it would have been easy for the Muslim apologist to win the debate over the divinity of Jesus if he could get William Lane Craig bogged down in this other issue and never actually got to finish addressing the topic at hand. So red herrings, they're things that aren't actually related to what it is you're discussing, and they serve to distract from that topic. We want to be on the lookout for those so we don't get distracted into these side topics and never actually get to finish making our point on the topic at hand. We also want to make sure that we don't do that. If somebody is making a point that makes us uncomfortable, we don't want to just try to redirect into a different topic so we don't actually have to answer for what it is that they're saying. We're not always going to have all the answers, and we want to be honest about that. And if somebody brings something up, we want to come up with answers for it, not try to use fallacies to distract from it. So that's the red herring. And the final fallacy that we'll go over today is called the genetic fallacy. It has nothing to do with genetics. This fallacy is when somebody bases their argument against a position on the origin of the claim rather than the claim itself. C.S. Lewis, in his book Mere Christianity, talks about how people will often try to discredit God as the moral standard giver by pointing to the fact that we learn about morality from society, from parents, from teachers, from religious leaders and all that. They teach us from a young age about what's good and what's bad, and therefore, God can't be the standard giver of morality. It's something that society just kind of perpetuates. This would be a good example of the genetic fallacy because people are just pointing to how we come to know something in an effort to discredit the reality of that thing itself. So you could see how this would be kind of absurd if we applied the same logic to mathematics and said that math is not objectively true because we all learn about we all learn math from teachers, from parents, and all that. So there's nothing inherently true about it because it's just a construct of society. It's very you can demonstrate the objective truthfulness of 2 + 2 = 4, whether you learn it from a parent or whether you piece it together yourself. There is an objective truth to that concept. So just pointing to where somebody learned it doesn't really do anything to discredit the idea itself. You'll see sometimes in debates where someone is trying to show that objective morality exists and is an indication that therefore God exists as the moral standard giver. A common response to that is now we can trace the development of morality through evolution in chimpanzees and stuff like that. We can see herd or I guess with chimpanzees it would be troop morality starting to come out in chimpanzees. And so this is just a development over time. Again, that whether or not that's true, that still commits the genetic fallacy because just being able to show how we come to know or how our understanding of morality has developed over time does nothing to discredit that morality is grounded in the character of God, the moral standard giver. Another way that it's commonly used is if you've ever had to evangelize to someone in a completely different culture, you might hear well, you're a Christian because you're American or you're Western or whatever, and I'm X religion because I'm from X culture. Again, that's a genetic fallacy. How we've come to believe the things we believe is not really a relevant indicator of the truthfulness of those claims. So the truth claims of each religion need to be examined, and then our belief is based on that, not based on how we came to know them. So we don't want to use we don't want to use the genetic fallacy as Christians either. And I think maybe one of the most common ways that Christians tend to use this is when anything new is introduced to the church. So when pianos were first brought in to church, or electric guitars, or drums, people pointed to the origin of these things, or what they believed was the origin of these things, as a reason to reject them as immoral. And that would be, again, examining the morality of the thing itself is a different discussion than just pointing at other people that used them before and they came out of that, and so therefore they're somehow tainted by that origin. Not gonna fly. So there we have it, the 5 fallacies that we're covering in this video. To review quickly, we went over the ad hominem fallacy, which is when somebody uses personal attacks against their opponent instead of actual attacks against the opponent's argument. Then we went over the false binary, and that's when somebody tries to box their opponent into just 2 different views that are mutually exclusive when really there's more options than just what they present. We went over the straw man argument, which is when somebody sets up a weak or exaggerated version of their opponent's position so that it's easier for them to argue instead of actually accurately representing what their argument is. We did the red herring fallacy, where somebody brings something up to divert attention away from the topic at hand. And finally, we went over the genetic fallacy, and that's when somebody attempts to discredit an idea merely by pointing out the origin of the idea itself, or where it came from. So those are the 5 fallacies for this video. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that this was useful. I hope that these provided tools for you to add to your arsenal as you go out into the world and contend for the faith. So if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment in the down there, and we'll see you next time.